das hinkriege. Hallo, mein Name ist Christoph Niemann. I'm going to switch to English. I guess you know who I am. I'm here, joined with Tekla from my studio and Katharina. And we gathered a couple of questions from you guys that we got via email and via Instagram and YouTube. And for the next, I would say, hour, we're just trying to go through, wow, that's a really strange drawing, go through as many of these questions as we have, and then yeah, we'll see where we land. So Tekla, take it away.
Hi guys, I'm the voice from the back or the office, and I'm going to tell you all of the questions that we got via email and Instagram. And we will start with questions that focus on the artistic practice. We got a few of them, and I'm going to start with one that goes: I feel lost in the plethora of style options. Some day I want to be a collage artist, other day a painterly approach seems fitting. It's difficult to choose an approach and stick with it. How do you deal with this, or is this something you are familiar with?
I'm incredibly lucky that I was able to work in different styles professionally. And of course, in the art academy, like probably all of us, I played with a lot of different styles. However, once you work professionally, and I think that's the most important first question to talk about, is you need to have a predictable style. So once you get a call for somebody who says, I want you to do a collage or a watercolor, you need to be able to do this on command. So you really have to feel very, very comfortable and practice it a lot before you put it in your portfolio. And I would also be a little careful of like having too many styles in your portfolio, because I guess as an art director or as a client, it will be difficult which to pick. However, when it comes to practicing, I think it's all bets are off, and I would just do whatever one enjoys. And there's one. Sorry, we have a technical problem. Is it working?
Maybe someone's writing us that they can't get into the live stream on YouTube. But is Instagram working?
Instagram is working.
Okay, great.
Okay, we'll just keep on going very slowly.
I mean, it says I'm live.
Yeah, so the one secret is having enough time to just like spend a Saturday and Sunday working in all these different styles, but maybe setting a clock. I never feel lost when I work in different styles, and I actually enjoy trying to experiment. If anything, I think I experiment too little. Yeah, so I don't really feel the problem, but I would be a little bit careful of how many styles I would share with the world.
Yeah, amazing. Maybe the question actually fits, or the next one you kind of already answered that, says, do you practice certain things you are not very familiar with in preparation for or during a project? So have you ever, like for a new project, learned a new style that you have never used before?
I, over the years, very painfully came to the conclusion that experimenting on deadline is a horrible, horrible idea. So I don't really try out really completely new things. Of course, every concept is different, so I definitely experiment conceptually, but stylistically, I think I wanna know what I'm doing beforehand. But what I do, and this is, I think, very important depending on the style. When I, for example, do watercolor drawing, it's an extremely physical, craft-based technique, and it's something I cannot do on command. So it's something where sometimes it takes a week or 2 weeks to really kind of get the hang of it. So when I would do a travel project where I go places and then I have to draw live, I probably spend a week or 2 weeks to draw, and most importantly, use these drawings as preparation drawings. So not saying, like, not hoping that these will turn out into great artworks, but really say, this is warm up. This is just like about getting into the groove.
Okay, so the next one is mentioning your last newsletter that you sent out, where you mentioned running and drawing. And he's asking, do you take a small sketchbook or just some folded paper with you while running? And how often do you run during a week? I guess that's an insider question.
Well, I run 3 or 4 times a week. I do not take pencil and paper. I did this one project where I actually ran a marathon while drawing. For that, I had a sketchbook and I was drawing, but it was really more an artistic stunt. I do, especially when I travel, I take my phone with me, because every time I run, I'm like in a foreign place, I always regret not having my phone with me, because inevitably, like all of a sudden, often I run in the morning, the sun comes up really beautiful, and I go like, why didn't I bring my my phone? I'm definitely too exhausted to really have great artistic thoughts and be in the mood for sketching. But I would definitely recommend bringing your phone. That's on runs, especially when you run in foreign places.
And this is actually a question we got asked a lot. You always, while traveling, running, whatever, you have your phone with you, you take photographs, and then you work with these photographs in terms of using them as like a image that you want to draw, or is it just like visual inspiration, or how?
It's more to cement, to kind of be reminded of an image. So it's more for usually I have an idea of what I want to draw. Let's say I'm in a new place. Like I'm in Paris and I see the Eiffel Tower, and I feel, oh, there's something with that tree next to the Eiffel Tower. That's a beautiful combination. I want to draw this. But then I can't remember all the details. I have an idea of where I want to start, and for that, the photograph is incredibly helpful, because I have a sense of like details. You know, what I guess if I would draw the Eiffel Tower, I would just do a crosshatch. But when you didn't actually look at the metal structure, it looks different. That said, I think it's very important, at least from my idea of drawing, to always separate yourself from the photograph. The photograph is so it's so tempting to kind of get lost in the detail, get lost in the uh, in the exact composition, and edit really, really hard. If there's a tree that doesn't belong there, just like I get it out, or I move it away, or if I don't like the building, but I like the building that's kind of outside the frame, then I just like bring that in. So it's, I guess a drawing is really a collage from memory, and one of the elements that goes into this collage is kind of photographic evidence that I use. And I will also say that usually, especially with unfamiliar places, it works best if the memory and the photo are very recent. So I couldn't, yeah, I was in New Zealand 4 years ago, 5 years ago. I could kind of take these photos and make an okay drawing of it. But for that to really work, it needs to be there and remember the scene. It needs to be in my head, and then look at the photo and then do the drawing. So it has to be very, very current.
Mm. Okay. The next question is referring to the abstract episode on Netflix you were in, and in that you say, the one thing that's dangerous about focusing on craft and working very hard is that it can keep you from asking the really relevant questions. I'm trying to get good at something, but is that thing I'm trying to get good at the real thing? I never really understood this. Can you please elaborate?
Well, the first thing is just to repeat and reiterate the importance of craft. And I really think that 95% of all problems will be solved at my desk with a pencil in my hand, working, exercising, getting better at the thing, or with a computer program, or with my camera. And this solves almost everything. And the only problem I feel appears when you're stuck, and when you're using it can be addictive if you kind of keep on doing the same thing, and then you get a little better, and you get excited about getting better. But what if that thing that you're working on is not relevant, or doesn't touch anybody? So for example, if you would today like keep on working on your MySpace page and you really love it and you just like add a little detail here, at some point you have to ask yourself, is a MySpace page really the thing you want to invest all your time in? And I had a great friend who passed away far too early, an editor called Armin Abmeier, and he coined this phrase in German. It was called fauler Fleiß. In English, it's not as catchy. It's probably something like lazy ambition. And he referred to it as, like there are certain projects I often see students do where somebody would say, I'm going to draw a jar of nails every day. It's incredibly complicated. It's incredibly time consuming. And of course, while you draw a jar of nails, which might be the most complicated thing one could draw, you don't have to think about what you want to do with your art. So in a way, you can escape into a really, really complicated problem instead of asking yourself, like, is a jar of nails really like the most ideal expression of my artistic self? And this, I think it very rarely happens, but I think it can happen that people can use craft to escape instead of really kind of using craft as a foundation for their artistic expression.
Have you ever had like moments in your career where you were like, oh my God, what am I doing? I need to change paths or need to go into another direction and then change what I'm doing completely? Did you ever have like a moment like this?
I never had doubt in terms of like, I'm completely in the wrong direction, in the wrong profession. Like I should become an actor or architect or anything. I definitely had moments where, especially when I was doing something that I had worked very hard to get to, where probably sometimes too late, I realized like, okay, is this really what I want to do? Or is this just like, now I'm getting used to, for example, I've been doing a column for the New Yorker, like the financial column, for a very, very long time. And I enjoyed it. It was an amazing assignment to do a drawing, like a weekly or bi-weekly drawing for the New Yorker. But at some point I was wondering, is this really like, can I really add something? Or if I look at my portfolio and I say there's like 200 drawings I did for that spot, if I add another 50, do I really add something to my portfolio, to the way I want to work? And as far as that goes, I definitely had moments of doubt, but I will say that this is really a luxury problem, and that I think when you work as a professional artist, if you have clients who like what you're doing and are willing to even pay you money for it, then you're in a very, very good place. And you should also be very, very careful of throwing that away. And what I've seen actually a number of times was that once you get assignments and people ask you, and if you're extremely lucky, you start having to turn down work where you really feel like, I own this. I don't need this. Like, what if I just like went out and just do something completely different? I would be advised to be extremely humble about it. It's like to build a relationship with clients, with editors, with art directors, with collectors, is a very, very special thing. And just because you might feel exhausted, or because you spend so much time with your own art, at some point you think, whatever, it's a little lame. It might not be lame for the other people, but once you throw it away, or what I've also seen is that like people become almost a little bitter about their art, and then they start kind of vocalizing how they almost look down on the people who like it.
So they're downselling their own art.
Yeah, in a way, they would like to be famous for other stuff, or feel like, oh, I've done this like for so long. Why don't you like let me do look at the novel I wrote in the meantime? And this is very dangerous, and I think you can easily get carried away. And I would think a lot, and I think this, like most artists had a moment in their life where they were really afraid about just like the monetary aspect of their job. And I think in these moments, it's good to remember that having people who come to you for your art and are willing to trust you, like pay you money, yes, but also trust you with, like, come up with an image that I'm then going to present to my readers or as brand communication. This is an insane amount of trust that they give you. And this is very, very special. And I wouldn't throw that away lightly.
So you say that one has to stay humble, or what? How would you put it? Or how easy is it to distance yourself from your work in that case that you can also sell it to other people?
Well, of course, humility is very important. I think in a way, the most difficult aspect of what we're doing is when I'm working, when I'm sitting there with a piece of paper and I'm drawing, all bets are off. I can do whatever I want. I can invent, I have to invent everything. And I've been doing this for a while, but you go into pretty deep valleys in terms of looking for new ideas, because you can never repeat something. The world is changing, so it's high drama, and it's very easy to get crazy, to become to feel self-pity, to feel doubt. Then on the other hand, feel kind of complete excitement. You know, you work on a drawing, feel, oh, this looks absolutely incredible, because you're all in your head. And then the other part of your job is you have to be out there in the world. You have to function with the people that you deal with professionally. And balancing these two personas can be very, very challenging. And I think the only remedy there is because I think by definition, doing art the way I do it is a rather solitary thing. And I have the huge advantage of also, of course, having you guys. Like, I say good morning in the morning, and I say good evening when I leave. I didn't have that for the longest time. And in that time, it was incredibly helpful to have friends that I would meet at night for a beer and talk about the art and talk about the ups and the downs and the maybes and the questions, to just keep my brain in check. Because I'm sitting there and I'm drawing and I'm going like, wow, that line is about 2.5 millimeters. What if I redo the entire thing with like 1.5 millimeters? Or if instead of a bluish black, I think a purplish black might be interesting. I mean, I spend a day thinking about these questions. So staying even remotely sane while your brain is engulfed in insane questions like that can be a challenge. And so, like, have a social life if all possible.
Maybe moving one step back, because I think this is one of the questions we get the most. Let me read this one out to you, because someone sent it via email. Apart from the fact that you have mega cool work, there must have been an editor who saw it and made the decision to take you for the cover illustration for the first time. How does something like that come about? And if you first did illustrations for editorials before, like you just described, how long was the process?
I was incredibly lucky to get work very early on. So right out of art school, I showed my portfolio, and it was a different time. There was a lot of editorial work. And to be assigned, I went to New York. There were like art directors very, very curious, because there was so much work to be assigned. So oh, there's a new guy from Germany. Like, let's give him a shot. What I thought was interesting in retrospect is I did my portfolio, and I never saw myself as an artist in terms of like, I want to express myself. But of course, I thought, okay, I have funny ideas and I know how to draw, and people are going to hire me for that. And only a little later did I realize that in the education that I received with all my other like fellow students in Stuttgart, where I studied with Heinz Edelmann, it was all about creating a lot of work, really being in command of producing ideas. And I was actually, without realizing it, I was pretty good at doing work, unembarrassing work on command. And at some point I realized, like, wow, actually half of or 3/4 of my work was not even people calling me up to have the most beautiful, inspired piece of art, but more like, we had a photo shoot. I don't know, like the film roll got bust. We have another 3 hours before deadline. We need something on that page. Who can we call? And that I was the person who you could call under extremely tight deadlines, and I would get something decent done that they could put in their magazine. So it's almost like I was like an emergency room doctor. And this was a quality that really paid my bills. And of course, if you're an art director, and I sat on the art directing table, and if you have people you can call, and because they're under pressure, and if they could call me, or if there's somebody else, and you know you can call them, and they will give you something that you can print, and you can go home at night and sleep and get the fire-breathing editors off your back. This is an incredibly valuable skill to have. And when I started, it was all like, what kind of drawings do I get into American illustration? And you felt like if you have like 5 drawings in the illustration annual, then you're a star. And if you have none of them, then you're not good. And I realized, no, this is like, it's nice like to have 1 or 2 at the end of the year, but your bread and butter is to do something that they can use. And yeah.
And how did you contact? So we have a few questions that are like being asked on Instagram during while you speak, and one of them asks like, how do you contact them? How do you get in touch with clients or like magazines or whatever? How was your approach? So did you just call them? Did you write them an email? Did you just went up to the office? How did you get in touch?
Well, at the time, it was still like at the beginning, even a physical portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
There are, I think there's less and less of that. I would definitely say having an Instagram account is absolutely mandatory. Having a clean website is absolutely mandatory. And the whole Instagram culture obviously changes every second. What I found is that when I talk with an art director or with a fellow artist about some third-person artist, there used to be a time where we would Google the name and say like, oh, go to their website. And now you just go on Instagram and say like, what do they do? Are they for real? And so the important thing to consider here is like your Instagram is not only for likes and follows. That's a nice side effect. But it might also be like, if I go to your Instagram account and I don't even scroll, I maybe only look at the first 9 tiles or the first 15, do I get a sense of who you are? And what I personally would advise, and of course everybody's different, I would keep all personal stuff off your Instagram page. If I consider you as a client to give you a job, I don't care what you had for dinner. And even when you went to like the state fair and there was a really interesting cow or so, unless it really has something to do with your art, I would keep it off that. And this is like, because it might be like a 3-second snapshot of who you are artistically. And when you post 15 things of a new project, that's fine, but keep bringing the other stuff back out. That, like, I would say the first 15 tiles should give an image of who you are, and don't let all your kind of like the work you're most proud of, don't let that kind of like sink all the way to the bottom, because it will take somebody extremely motivated to scroll that far down.
Mm-hmm. And because we were already talking about covers, someone on Instagram asked or is asking that you made a lot of technically innovative covers for the New Yorker. One question is a static cover not enough? Question mark. And what the influence of technology into the world of illustration will be in the future. These are 2 different questions, but maybe just keep them in mind.
If I know that. I've been always extremely curious about technology, but I found that there's one question I ask myself, and that is, does the technology solve a problem that I had before the technology was invented? So for example, I did an app called Petting Zoo, and the idea was you had a drawing, and you touch the drawing, there's a little animal, and you can like swipe and touch it, and it moves. And this is a fascination that I had, that I think most artists have. It's like, what if I could go to the drawing and touch it and interact with it? And I didn't know, of course, like before computers, I didn't know how to solve that thing. But once the technology came up where you could actually make a drawing that you could interact with, I was like, oh, wow, that's great. Even simpler, when I was growing up, I always was working with felt tip pens. So there was no way to get even color. You draw a house, you want a red roof, and you couldn't, it's just no way. When Photoshop came along,
Click.
I was like, wow, click. And I never, for example, I've never been to a movie, say a James Bond movie, there's a car chase scene, and you're just like following the evil guy down the road. I never had the urge to turn around and say, like, I wonder what's going on here. And so this example is, of course, VR. And I played with VR because I'm curious, but I find the problem with VR is it's a fantastic, amazing, inspiring technology, but it doesn't solve a creative problem that I have ever had. I never wanted to look around in a painting. I think painting or like drawing or filmmaking is about editing. It's about forcing the viewer in a certain direction. Immersion is fine for other things, but for the kind of plot-based storytelling that I do, I think it's very important to force people in a certain angle. And the same thing with like Photoshop filters. There's like a lot of interesting stuff, but it just might look cool, but it creates results that I would never think of without Photoshop. And that's where I usually draw the line. I say, like, does this, especially when it solves something that would take me much, much longer without technology, then I'm very, very interested. If it's just like yet another, if it's like a rainbow colored pen, it's like, oh, this is fun. I might try it, but I'm not going to use it on the.
But I mean, every time like a new technology came up, you had to did you have to force yourself to deal with these, or were you like so curious that it was fun for you, and then you just sat down and be like, okay, nice, let's try out this and that, and VR and animations and whatever. Was that easy for you, or?
It's something I'm inherently interested in. So I'm always like, okay, I cannot know whether. Of course, I have a certain idea, but of course, before you try it, it's very difficult to see whether it actually solves something, because the way an application is presented, whether it's Illustrator or Photoshop or Flash or After Effects, I don't really know what it can do, whether it might actually be able to solve something like some long-standing problem, unless I really try it. I find that sometimes I have to pull the cord, like when it comes to coding, when it comes to the depth of After Effects and scripting, where I realize I would really have to go back to school and learn things for another 10 years. And where I sometimes feel like, okay, if it's something I cannot learn within a month or two, there's people who are better at this. And at some point, it all becomes about tech and not so much about the artistic process. And then I know, even though I might be tempted, I pull the cord and say, like, maybe stop.
Okay, maybe I have a fitting question for that, because that was actually a pretty long email, so I'm trying to rephrase it somehow. The person was telling us on how her day is like divided up into tasks that are not super important, but have to still at some point have to get done, super important and urgent tasks that have to be done. And she's like really struggling on in what order to do these and how much of these to fit into a whole day, and then staying up super late, waking up early in the morning. Have you ever struggled with time management? Do you have any time management tips or thoughts you could share?
I've always, and this is something where I consider myself extremely lucky, I always hoped the day would have 3 more hours. And I think it's an absolute prerequisite for being an artist, that you love the idea, that you have to be pried away from your desk. Once it's like a thing where you feel like, oh God, I have to do another 2 hours, like then you're screwed. There is, especially with administrative work, I think I was very, very good at doing all these things for the first 12 years of my professional life. I did everything, from writing an invoice, from building my website. I did everything myself. And I got so hardcore that, for example, I said, if I have to go to the post office, I'm going to say no to whatever the assignment was. So there were people, like nice jobs, or an ad agency called and said, like, oh, we would consider you for this job. Can you send us your portfolio? It was like, they want a physical portfolio. I'm not going to do it, because I would have to get up from my desk. And at some point I realized it might become a bit of a problem because I was limiting myself. And then as I was like doing more traveling, some public speaking, booking airline flights, like answering emails, I realized like 6 hours a day were just filled with work like that. And that's when it was becoming problematic. And that's when I started working with an assistant, probably too late. However, I know this is, of course, a financial thing. You have to be able to afford that. If you think you can afford it, I would highly recommend to do that. Again, it's a privilege question, but I think time, like art is non-linear. Art is not efficient. And the foundation of the work that we all do is having all the time in the world to do everything like 100 times over. Once you're under deadline, then of course I have to be able to do something very, very quickly. But in general, I think it's all about being able to sit at your desk and redoing something 100 times. If you feel like, oh, there's this curious little thing, you have to be able to chase it until you feel it's gone or it's interesting or not. And doing that on the clock is very, very difficult. And I remember like going to art school for the first time in my life, having all day to draw. So no school, no between school and art school, I had to do social service. It was always like, okay, from 6 in the morning to 1, I had to do that. And finally I can go to my desk. And this revelation of saying like, I can get up in the morning and do art until the middle of the night was fantastic. So it's really, I know it's very hard if you have to squeeze in all the other things. And yeah, it's find time to draw. When it comes to when to do what, I would definitely try to do the art first, because once you do all the other stuff, I think it's if then all of a sudden you only have an hour to draw at the end, it will be very difficult to get a lot of this out. But of course, if you have to file your taxes, you should be doing that too, because if you don't, that might become
Have you ever done like an all-nighter, and how was the day after?
I'm totally obsessed with like this comparison of sports and art. And in terms of the sports comparison is that I want the best result. I want to win. I want to win with as many points or whatever sets as possible. And then I think of like, how can I achieve that? And I've come to the conclusion that working very even hours every day actually gives you the best result. If there was a different way, I would do a different way. And the only reason why I do it very straight from kind of like 9 to 6, and then by now the weekends as well, is because I feel that gets the best results. And all-nighters, I've done, I think, 2 all-nighters like during art
In
school
total?
there were jobs that had to be done. And it's really stupid because the work you do at night, especially once you're sleep deprived, will never be as good. So if you really, really care about the result, it won't live up to the thing that you do at full consciousness. And of course, the next day, there's no way you're going to be as sharp as if you had your recovery in between. And this is really where the comparison to sports comes in. When I did this marathon project, I talked to a running coach because I had no idea how to properly run. And he gave me a running schedule. And said, like, on Mondays, you do an hour with that pulse for that distance, and Tuesday that, and Wednesday that, and on Thursday, you're not going to do anything. And he said, if you mess with the recovery day, it's as bad as if you miss a practice day, probably even worse. Because he said, basically, the body is a curve, and to build your muscle and to build your endurance, you have to tickle the muscles and really exhaust them, and then you have to rest. And if you don't give it the rest, the next time the curve cannot kind of jump up as high as you want. So I think there's something about like an all-nighter being, oh yeah, I'm tough, I worked all night. But if you care about the result, don't.
Yeah, somehow they are romanticized, the all-nighters. I don't know why. Maybe next question would focus more on projects and collaborations. Someone asked us, you do so many different types of projects. editorials, murals, books, print, exhibitions, etc. Which ones are more for self-promotional fun or for other reasons, and which ones are more for financial reasons, and how do you decide?
I'm in an extremely privileged position now that I can choose, and that I try not to do things purely for financial reasons. Because I found, but this is a new thing that definitely for the first, whatever, 15, 20 years of my career, there was no way I could do that. But where I find that ultimately it makes me profoundly unhappy if there's a job and I feel I can't do what I'm good at. I feel that the work is not being valued. I also think that on the long run, it's horrible if you do work that the client eventually won't be happy with. And usually the pure money jobs is the ones where there's no kind of artistic reward. There's usually something very off. But this is something that really, there's, I think, very few people who can even ask themselves that question. So in a way, I think for most of us, it's most parts of a career, the question is irrelevant. I will say, however, that when I started, the work of an illustrator was a complete, to like use the business term, B2B. So I was a business, and my client were editors, publishers, and I had to only deal with them. So in a way, if they would call me, like an ad agency calls me and I did like whatever, some technical drawing, it was perfectly fine. They paid me, they knew I would deliver solid work, everything was good. Now, I don't think there's many B2B artists left. I think you always have to also have one angle, whether it's through Instagram, through exhibition or books, where you also work directly for the audience. So in a way, whether, of course, like you do some jobs for money, but I think you always have to think about how people see your work. And to come back to the question earlier from how art directors see your work, like you can go out and show like what you're doing, but you also have to produce stuff constantly for people to see. You can't wait for them to call you up. So I think whether it's through work or personal projects, you have to constantly produce work. It has to become one thing. When you go at your desk, you produce work for clients, you produce work for yourself, and then somehow you have to pick up what you show. But I don't, from an artistic practice, I don't think you can say, oh, I'm just doing professional work. So this idea of personal work, whether it is a loosey, crazy experimental project, or just like something new you could you want to try out, is an integral part of what I do. And I think it has to be. I think nobody has the luxury now to basically say, oh, just like people have my portfolio, I don't have to deal with the question of what I do in my free time.
But there's another question actually referring to this, especially on the self-initiated project. So, for example, like your books that you self-publish, etc. How do you decide which one to finish, to publish, and which one to postpone or to give up? So, is there like a point where you like gave up a project, or is there like a moment that you know that the project is going to be good or bad?
I have some people I talk to, and it takes a long time to develop relationships with people where you can really talk, like usefully talk about the merit of art, whether it's one drawing or a whole project. But this is probably one of the most difficult questions. I know that maybe 30% of what I do here in the studio will be seen outside the studio, and that might be a lot. So I always produce more than I show. So, and I think this is a natural thing, and it's not like when I do something, the assumption is not this will be published. The assumption is I'm just doing it, and there's a 1 in 5 chance it might clear the hurdle for something bigger. Often a little time is good. When I work on something, then kind of like leaving it, looking at it a week later and see like, is this still strong enough to publish?
Mhm. Okay. So we got a lot of questions on Instagram regarding AI. I guess this is like the highly debated art world question. What is your stance on AI? Are you threatened? Are you excited? Do you think AI can like get rid of artists altogether? Do you have like a
Well, the first thing is, I think it's at least the models I know about are highly unethical because they were trained on artists without their consent. And this is just bad. And I know some people argue of like, oh, people like an artist goes to a museum and copies a painting. There's nothing, it's like the same thing. I completely disagree because these large learning models are built with the intent of creating mashups. So I think, and this is my opinion, it is a sophisticated way to copy art and do it in a way that it's kind of like legal, basically that you can't be caught. The more interesting question is like, are we threatened by it? I think absolutely. And I don't know if we can do something about it. It's going to be here to stay. I hope there's going to be some legal repercussions on the way it's being done right now. The biggest fear right now that I have is that basically there's going to be so much of this like AI generated crap being flushed into the world that it's going to drown out the handmade stuff. That even if the handmade stuff is, or like the human made work is better, that at some point you're just not even going to see it anymore. But that's a question for more like in 10 or 20 years, I don't know. When it comes to like myself and my relation to art, art is for me about communication. So when I look at a piece of art, for me, it's important who did this drawing. So it's not, when I go to an airport and I need to find a bathroom, I just want to find the bathroom. It has utility, like if I have a pictogram. If I look at a painting in a museum or in a gallery, it's not about finding something, it's about an exchange. It's almost like a conversation. And it's very important that there's a human being on the other side of that conversation. For example, if I look at a sunset has no intention. A sunset can be more magnificent, probably is much more magnificent than the greatest painting a person can ever do. Like AI can also be sometimes or AI generated art can be impressive, but it doesn't touch me in a way that art does. It touches me, but not in a completely different way. And my favorite example is when let's say if a 5-year-old writes you a birthday card, it's going to be full of mistakes, and it can be improved in terms of spelling mistakes, commas, evenness of letter shapes, and so forth. But of course, like if a 5-year-old would use ChatGPT or whatever to make it better, it wouldn't be a better card. And so in a way, for me, the idea that the 5-year-old maybe struggled with writing and with coming up with something is an integral part of what it does. And art is also, it's like a kiss. Let's say somebody would build a robot who physically, by like all scientific metrics, kisses better than a human being. I would still say like it doesn't really, that's not what it's all about. And then like maybe even more, like when you think of something like a first kiss, this idea of a first kiss is something a machine cannot deliver because like it's like completely in a different metric. And I think that this is something that Silicon Valley doesn't care about, because there everything is about scalability. And I think that's ultimately the biggest misunderstanding or the biggest mismatch, is that AI is the idea of scalable art or scalable everything, scalable creativity. And creativity is not scalable. Also because like if I tell a joke twice, it's not funny the second time. So there is this is like if I write a novel, I can't write it again. And I think this problem cannot be solved with AI. And the problem is, I don't even want it to be solved. It's like, I think no writer ever hoped for or was looking for a tool to help them write a novel. And so again, I think it's another case of technology solving a problem that is only being solved because it's possible and not because it's necessary.
But when it doesn't come to creative tasks, would you still use it, like in terms of for text work, for whatever? Are your feelings when it doesn't come to like creative images, but other outputs of an AI?
My very blurry rule is that AI is great when I know what I'm looking for. And so I could imagine that, like, when I look for a cure for a disease, and I have a model, I have a computer, and I can feed it all this information, and it can help get me there faster, then it's great. And I would be the first person to use it, and I commend people for using it. Again, like if I would design a system that helps me navigate, and AI can design a system that helps you navigate an airport or so better than a human being, I think there's absolutely no reason to say, no, we like the human made one better. So if there's a goal, but the problem with art is, like, if I write a novel, I'm not solving a goal. I have to invent the problem and the solution kind of like in one. And I think this is for that, AI is kind of like, yeah, it just makes a mix of all the novels that were written before. So by definition, it can also not really come up with something new.
Yeah. Changing topics a bit, because I really like this question, and it actually is a good fit to your recent mural that you did for the Horst Janssen Museum in Oldenburg, which was unveiled a few weeks back. Someone asked, how do you consider that playful, fun compositions fit into the production of architecture in our contemporary times and people's interaction with an indoor-outdoor environment while fixated on screens?
Well, there's the whole social question of screens, and like people sitting in a restaurant looking at their phones, what that means for communication. I'm mostly fascinated by the whole question as a design challenge. And of course, I stare at the phone for far too long. And I know, we all know that something that works on Instagram might not necessarily work as well in the real world. And this has to do with two things. First, the size. And we have this in the studio that we have like some large silk screens that, or large paintings, they do not translate on Instagram. And of course, you see if they fall flat, you go like, oh God, they didn't work. Yeah, well, they didn't work in that format. The second thing is that on Instagram, you swipe through. So you have like a second and a half before you get something. With the projects I've done in the real world, it was a complete new experience. Like even when coming from newspapers or magazines, where usually you deal with something you can still hold in your hand. When it takes you a few seconds or maybe even a minute to walk by a piece of art, it completely changes your perception. And artistically, it means a completely different thing. And for me, the biggest change was color. How when I have whatever need something with a little color. Okay, like here. Even when I have a page here with okay, now everything's gray. Here I have a little pink here or here. This is a good example. Here I have some green. The green helps me tell the story. So the green in this case is like a vocabulary for a certain object, or it says like, oh, apple, green, nature. When you have a green wall that's really like 30 by 20 meters, the green all of a sudden has a physical impact on you. It does something like certain loud music. You feel it in your body. You will never have that when the color is that big, but you have the once the color really surrounds you, you totally have that. And for me, this is more, I can't judge how it's being used, but for me, it's a completely new experience to see how color, shape, contrast, even storytelling is not scalable in a sense that like something that works on that size, it might work completely different once you scale it up at 5,000%.
Mhm. So I think there's quite a few questions that are referring to like your personal time or maybe your breaks in between drawing. Someone asks, do you ever take any breaks from drawing? If yes, for how long? If not, do you draw specific things to relax?
Of course, I take a lot of breaks from drawing. I think there's like very few days where I don't draw at all because there's always something always comes up. I found that the landscape drawings that I do now, I've been doing them for probably 20 years before I even showed them. At some point, I started showing them on Instagram just because I had nothing else to post. But they really started out as a complete, just like something on holidays, I would draw. When I travel, I draw. And I try to always find the time to do that. And to this day, and I've been doing this for a long time, thinking about something, working on most projects is always like a puzzle. For me, it's like a Sudoku, except for I produce art. So it's something to keep my mind off. This is something I just do, and it hasn't stopped from happening. And I might even find myself, even if I work on deadline, I might find myself doing that on a weekend. And I think it's very important to have the time to do that. And I often think that in a strange way that actually ends up producing good results. I know, however, that you have to do, sometimes you have to have input. Without input, there's no output. And there is, even though I think 99% of good stuff happens at the desk, if you don't get up and look around, you won't be able to kind of create new work. And one thing I found as I kind of like professionalized the whole travel drawing thing, at some point I realized I make the mistake. I go somewhere and then within 10 minutes I go like, okay, what can I draw? And so can I get my sketchbook out and I sit down? It doesn't work that way. It really, like, I was in Japan last year and I started drawing too quickly. And I realized that no, you have to actually, first of all, first spend 2 days to just look at something and really be open. I have no idea what works. It has to, like, it's almost like a sponge that has to be filled with some fluid before you can start. If you start squeezing too quickly, there's nothing that comes out.
Okay, yeah, interesting. There's actually quite a few questions about music, and as we're like in the last 5 to 10 minutes of this Q&A, you decide what you want to answer. So there's this question of what kind of music do you like? Have you ever been inspired by a piece of music? Why did you learn the piano and not another instrument? What comes to your mind?
Well, the most important thing is that I'm very happy with my job. I think it's a very good job to be an illustrator. However, I'm really jealous of music because I think music can touch me and maybe most other people more and stronger and more profound than art can do. I have been touched by like a Mozart more like emotional, like this, like being moved to tears happens much easier for me with music, or much more often. It's definitely not easy, much more often than it does with art. There is something, and it's amazing. It's just like physical. It's just like shaking molecules, but it kind of breaks through to you in a way that's stronger than with the greatest art that I've ever seen. And part of what I do with art is like kind of chasing a high that I'm actually experiencing with music. And especially when you do animation, there's this like the moment you put music on it, it just gets like 100 times better. And when it's really good music, it just gets like 1,000 times better. And so I think music is, it's kind of like a demon that's kind of like walking around showing you all the time what actually is possible with abstraction and with art. I never, that said, I never listen to music when I work, except for painting. But drawing for me is too, it's like writing, it's too complicated and I can't have any distraction. So I cannot listen to music while I'm sitting at my desk.
But with drawing, you mean like ink drawings or like acrylics or?
Yeah, like paint, once I paint, and painting for me means like when you paint and you do a stroke and you build layers. So where there's no, like when I do a drawing, usually every stroke is final. So it's really you putting marks, and painting for me is more like sculpting of like, and drawing is too hard. And once there's like the information of music, it's it overpowers my brain, and I can't have that. The first reason I wanted to do music for is because I love music instruments, and I always wanted to have a piano. And I knew my both grandparents had grand pianos, and I always loved grand pianos. And I think I can never have, I don't have a grand piano, but I always thought like, wow, I would love to have a grand piano, but without making music, there's really no point. So it was like the sexiness of music instruments that was a huge inspiration to learn an instrument. And I found that the whole kind of getting insane while doing art thing, I think, is huge and it's real. And trying to find a way to get your head away from art to kind of calm down. Other people have it with cooking. I don't. I have it a little bit with sports, but even with sports, I keep thinking. I can read a book in my head. I don't read a thing. I just read through the lines, and my head goes. The worst is, of course, social media. You're on Twitter, and just like that's, you kind of drown out, but you don't. And I find that making music, especially kind of classical music, reading score, is so difficult that I don't have any bandwidth to think about anything else. And so it's very sane, not only for art, but also for all the other horrible shit that's going down in the world, to have something that's pure good humanity and focusing on that. So.
Besides from music, is there anything else that helps you relax?
Seeing other people.
Like friends and family?
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. One question that I also loved, your work and particularly your live talks are very funny. Do you at all identify as a comedian? Who do you take comedic inspiration from, and what role comes comedy play in your art and art in general?
When I think about it, what do I want to create with my with my art? It's an emotional reaction of some kind, and I'm actually pretty open to what emotional reaction. But like a lot of artists, there's always this insecurity of like, does it work? Does the emotional connection happen? And when you have somebody, especially when you're on stage, when somebody is giggling or laughing, you know you came through. If you say something extremely profound and people just nod, especially when you're like on stage and there's a dark audience and there's nothing happening, it's very, very confusing and very unsettling. So I found that humor, especially when you're on the stage, is just like a very beautiful way to realize whether you connect. But I found that humor in art, the reason I like it is it's more like a classic joke works with, you build an expectation and then you fuck with an expectation. And in a joke, the screwing with the expectation, this is when you laugh. But this is also when you're engaged. So the only way this works is like if the reader really invests and follows you along, so you have to trust me. I can like put you up, there's a man walking in the bar and the bartender says that, you go, what happens next? And then comes the punchline. And so humor is when you actually connected with the viewer enough. And the same can actually happen with tragedy, where like, you know, Kurt Vonnegut, I think he said like the recipe of like writing a book is like you create a character that people care about, and then you chase them up a tree and throw things at them. The most important thing is at the beginning, you have to make a character that people care about. And I think this is like, whether it's humor or tragedy, it's like this is how you create this connection that allows for emotion. And humor is maybe a more obvious way, but it's not about the laughing or the jokes. It's really just like that, the twist that shows you are really, really close with people.
So maybe one last question before we come to an end. We've got this a few times. Can you recommend some books to read? Or should we post a list later today?
No, well, there's like in terms of like this whole question of creative pursuit, there's Creativity Inc. by I think the writer is called something Catmull, who's one of the founders of Pixar. Incredible book. Not and it talks about, of course, about Pixar and the movies, but it's really about creative endeavors, how it's plannable or not plannable. And Stephen King on writing is something that I also, because it really talks about the craft of writing. Again, so it's not only for novelists. It really changed my perspective of how to approach storytelling or how to approach the creative process. But I think there's two different things. There's one, books about craft and about creativity that I like, and then there's books about like input, and I constantly have input. When I think you need input, you need to read, you need to look at a lot of things. But I think once you sit down at the desk to draw, I try to keep books at a distance, and because I think then it's too late. And at this point, I have to draw from what's within me, and I don't then go out and go like, okay, let's look at a museum catalog of a show that I enjoyed, because I think that's more dangerous, that you then get stuck in their way of thinking. And at this moment, I have all this information, all the knowledge, all the impressions I had, but then it's just finding my own way. It's like a chess game you play with yourself, and like, what's your next move? And opening a book then is, I think, distracting from this beautiful riddle that's unfolding in front of you.
But because it distracts you visually, so that you want to like copy it, or just because it doesn't help looking at it? Does that make sense?
Because then I see that, oh, this is how that person solved something. And drawing or any creative pursuit, and there's like when I work on something conceptual, it's very analytical. It's like I move something like a millimeter to the left, up, right. When I paint, it's all decision making. There's like, I have a pencil, and all I can do is like, there's like 1 million spots here where I can put a drawing on. That's it. So it's all about, do I put it here? Do I put it here? Once I have like 3 lines, they go like, what if I put one to the left? So this is the chessboard. This is where all the stuff is happening. And when I look at another chess game, this is not going to help me for this one here. I need the experience from the other chess games I looked at in my life that will inform my decision making here. But looking at a very inspiring game somebody else played 50 years ago, then it's all the focus needs to be here. And then especially when you paint, it's literally fluid. So often the decision making is it's not something I can reverse. It's like the ink is flowing and you have to go like, wow, it's like it's flowing down the page. Do I take red and go in there and push it back up again? And I think the secret there is just to do everything, just being focused on that world and pushing, in a way, also forgetting everything else you've seen, and just saying like the entire world is just this one stupid piece of paper. And books have and other inspirations have absolutely nothing to contribute there.
I like the chessboard comparison. I think that works really well. So we're over an hour now. So last question. I've listened to all your podcast appearances, and I wish you would do more. Will you please, or I'm adding this one, will you do another Q&A at some point?
Well, let's see what the reaction is. Like, no, I enjoy this. I have to say, I have profited a lot from listening to people, from talking to people. If this is something that works that people profit from, I would be more than happy to do this more often. Unless I answered every single question now, then we don't have to.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I couldn't like cover all of the questions. I'm sorry about that, but yeah, maybe next time.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys for joining us, and I guess see you soon. We'll try to record and post the works on different channels. We have the material. We'll do something with this, and yeah. Well, thank you for your interest, and keep letting us know what you think, what we can improve, and thank you.
Thank you so much.